Well, Stendhal once defined the novel very famously as a mirror moving along a roadway, which I think is a very wonderful description of the realistic novel, which has a historical setting. I think, however, that the mirror also is turned toward the author, and that there is an inwardness as well as the outward. So my writing usually combines the external world, which is very detailed and historically accurate, with the interior world that may be dreams and hallucinations and fantasies and oscillating between reality and surrealism. And I think of life as being a mixture of the two. Yes, I imagine the novel at the very eve of the Iraqi war, just when all these forces were contending, and there might have been the possibility of not going to war. And now when we look back upon it, we think, what a mistake, and a tragic mistake, hundreds of thousands of people and lives lost. But at the time, there was debate. And so my character in the novel, this woman, she's very agitated and very concerned with what she sees as a moral breakdown in the country. And then she herself is approaching a brink of her own crisis. So the two come together. That's right. And he returns to his family in upstate New York. He's been wounded, both physically and psychologically. And it traces the consequence of his having gone. He's very idealistic, and he enlisted, wanting to help his country, and then comes back very disillusioned. And then the consequences with the family, which are quite complicated. It's not simple. It's a complicated portrait. Yes, I think so. It's a very troubled and very divided country, with a drama or melodrama that continues to this very minute. Yes, I think so. I'm concerned with psychological realism, and in that world where we're governed by dream images and very emotionally tied up with these images. And art always has images. Whereas philosophy or politics are arguing theoretically, art chooses individuals to dramatize a certain situation. So some of the great works, like by Shakespeare's tragedies like King Lear or Hamlet or Macbeth, they present these people who are exemplary, and they represent character traits that we all have. We look at Macbeth or King Lear or Hamlet, they are images of human images. Yes, different kinds of violence, and the young woman is coming into her identity at a time when it's possible for women to be like pioneering in education. In the decades before this, women were barely allowed to be professors. But now in the United States, women can be presidents of universities. And 20 years and 30 years ago, there weren't any women teachers at the universities. It's very rare. So it's been an extraordinary change in the rights of women. So I think that we're living at a very good time for women, but it's not perfect. So I thought of her as in a pioneering generation, but coming out of a primitive, almost fairy tale background where there has been this traditional violence against women. And she still confronts it, even though she's on a higher level, and the violence is more psychological now. Yes, very much. The universities became, as you say, microcosms, because there's one side that's very patriotic and pro-war and pro-government, and the other side much more pacific and say, no, 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 wait, let's think about this. Going to war should be the last thing you do rather than the first thing. And the two poles are very divided, and students on both sides, and demonstrations, and a lot of anger. And of course, the pro-war people won. They won, and now it doesn't look as if that was a wise thing at all. But still, the country is very divided. In the aftermath of 9/11, there's a feeling that terrorism is so important that we have to surrender our individual rights. And now the government is spying on the people and saying, well, it's for the terrorists. The caution against terrorism, which can justify all kinds of spying now. It's like it will never end. I'm focusing on a person, so I take her through her life from when she was a very small child, and as I said, this sort of fairy tale, primitive, very rural area, and taking her through a foster home and then adoptive parents and then moving to college and university, and she goes to Harvard and she's got this very, very high position. So it becomes a university novel, but only later. You know, in the beginning it's more like what we call coming of age novel. And all along the line she has to give herself a name, she has to resist other people giving her names, and she's inventing herself. Which I think is typical of women. Well, I think of people as being very much in process, that people create themselves. We inherit certain predilections. We inherit some genetic characteristics, but we also inherit idealism, more ideas. And in this case, MR really inherits a very idealistic kind of religion, which is Quakerism. And it's not really a Christian religion, it's more like an inward spiritual, a very spiritual religion and very democratic. A Quaker, for instance, does not want to belong to an army. A Quaker does not want to take orders. They don't believe in taking orders from above, you know. It's like the inner light. And when you have that sense of egalitarianism with other people, and I think it's much more likely that you will be sympathetic with other people. You would make a good teacher because you don't feel that you have all the answers. And MR is somebody who is very idealistic, but her problem is, as an administrator, that she needs to listen more to people with experience, like the lawyers, and she needs to make compromises, but she's so idealistic and enthusiastic that she makes some mistakes. Yes, well, I think it's a great theme of our civilization, and I studied philosophy in the university. How do we know what we know? Because there are whole elements that we don't know, and if there isn't language to express them, we actually don't know that we don't know them. It's sort of like a whole part of the human brain can be just blank. And she's confronting this sort of ignorance with other people, especially in her childhood, people who try to literally suffocate a child and literally drown a child, and she fights her way, and she's taken up, and and the books become her salvation. Well, the novel was born originally from a dream. I found it very moving and very haunting. I had a lot of emotional feeling about this dream of a woman sitting at a table, kind of a mahogany table, and she had put on makeup very awkwardly, like it was like mud, like she was maybe hiding behind this thin film of mud, but she didn't know that, and she's sitting quietly, very quiet, but sad. And I'm thinking, who's that woman? And I'm thinking that she may be somebody who was catapulted to a high level, and now she's afraid, and she's all alone, and she doesn't know if she's strong enough to do her job. That she's going to try to do her job, but she doesn't know what she looks like. So there's a point in the novel, maybe it could be page 400, when we come to that scene and she's with her board of trustees and they're looking at her and she's really so exhausted and she can't sleep at night. So she is actually having a nervous breakdown. And so when I got to that point, I understood who she was and why that was happening. So I had to write the whole novel to get to that point of understanding. And of course, it has to be part of me because I feel like a sister to this person. Well, it is and it isn't, you know. I could see myself in that position that I made some really bad mistakes out of naivete and idealism and didn't listen to advisors and now was all alone and maybe did not have a companion or did not have a husband, and my parents are dead, and she's lost one parent, she's lost her mother, and that she has to put herself all together somehow. So she goes back to spend the summer with her father in her old room, you know, and her old books are there, and she just becomes very simple, and she's not a teacher, she's not a president anymore. It's like going back to childhood and then coming back again, and healing. And I do believe that one can heal. But I don't think you can do it overnight. I think it has to be a period of time. In this case, 3 months. It's based on reality. Not my reality, but somebody I know. 3 months, but they came back, and they did very well then. Very much. And MR wants to have scholarships for different students who are not getting to go to university. And all that really is happening, you know, to bring more young people into the university whose families have never gone to college, and sort of bring them in. In fact, I have some of those students, like Hispanic students, nobody in the family went to college ever, and they turn out to be good students. They're shy, you know, they're not at home, but in the past they never went to university. Yes, it was very interesting and very tense. The mood of the novel is anxiety. You know, will I fail? And will something terrible happen? Yes, MR, when she's a little girl, she tries to take on the name of her sisters, thinking that the sister is older and stronger than she is. She doesn't understand that her sister actually has been murdered. So she has this idea that the sister's name will give her more strength. And then as she gets older, people give her names. And it's like she has to resist the names that she's given. So they call her Meredith, or they call her Mary, which is the name of actually a dead girl. And she takes from that MR and makes that her name. So she's trying to deal with the name she's given. Particularly when women have careers or have public identities, the woman comes out, let's say, out of the private home, and then if you're a doctor, or a lawyer, or a professor, or president, whatever, you do have to step into a kind of role. And men have always done that. The man who's at home, the father or the husband, comes out and he becomes the lawyer or the president, and it takes on a role. which I think is traditional. So women learn to do that maybe. It's a little more recent for women to learn that. So when I'm a professor with my students, that's my responsibility. I have a responsibility to be the professor, you know. And it's not as just playing a role exactly, but having a commitment where you're not only yourself, and you don't talk about yourself, and you don't let your emotions guide it, but you're sort of living up to the obligations of the role. And that's what MR tries to do. She tries to forget about her background, which is very unhappy. She doesn't want to talk about it. And when she's interviewed, she doesn't tell the truth. You know, she was not adopted, or she doesn't have a foster home. She sort of makes it out to be different because she doesn't want to talk about that. She wants to talk about her work. And I sympathize with that. There's also a love interest, and she is deeply in love with a man who's elusive. He's an astronomer, he's at Harvard, and she's not there. But he does love her in a way. It's just that he's married, but he's not happily married. And I know women who get in this position, they are involved with a very wonderful but difficult man who's not there. And so they're alone. But at the end of the novel, his marriage is breaking, so they probably will get together. I'd like to write a novel that, well, it ends here, but the reader knows something might happen 2 months later. So you have a feeling that the people will go on, and I think that they will come together. Yes, I knew that she would undergo a breakdown, and she would have a nadir, and then she would heal and come back. And she'd come back to the university. We think that she will be strong now, and we think that she will have her love will come to some fruition. We don't know for sure, and that's how I feel about our own lives. You know, I think that I will do this, and I hope I will do that. I don't know for sure because it's in the future. And I'd like to write a novel that has a definite ending, and I know I'm moving toward the ending, and all the themes come together, but it's not the end of the life. The life does continue. Yes, I was definitely writing about a woman, as I said, sort of a pioneering generation. She doesn't have a companion or a husband, and that's one of the reasons she's done so well. She's had all this time, she focuses on her work, and some of her colleagues don't have time, and she's the person in the department who does all the work, and they know that she can do it, and she will. And I know women just like that. And there's a wonderful woman who's president of Princeton University, and she's not married, and so she focuses all her time on the university. She has been very successful. She is actually, now she's retiring. She'd been president for 12 years, and she's a friend of mine. This is not about her, but I look upon her and I see her schedule, how hard she works, how she travels, and I had the president's schedule that I was given. So then I imagine the house that she lived in. She has her own little room up here, but it's a big house, and it's got a basement. And it's an old house, like it's 200 years old, and she's living up in this little room with the lights, and she has her desk and her bedroom, and then the house is so big, you know, and other people have lived there. And how strange that would be to know that, and she doesn't own the house, you know, to know that she has to leave the house and she's sort of living there temporarily. And just a sort of, you know, existential, dramatic feeling that you'd have. And people would say to her, well, you don't own this house and you're living here all alone, you know, aren't you lonely? And she would say, well, no, I'm doing my work. Oh, the Nobel Prize? Well, I don't really know much about how people are nominated, so I think that officially one is never told that one is nominated. You only know if you've won it. But I do know Nobel Prize winners in Princeton and at Berkeley who are in science, and they're very deserving. I don't think it's changed your life too much. You know, they're already hardworking, and they don't work any less. You know, at Berkeley, if you win a Nobel Prize, you get a free parking place. That's what you get, a free place to put your car. That's the reward.